Okay, good morning again. Today what I'm sharing with you is a framework that I'm hoping to use to contextualize my dissertation research. And I'm interested in the sharing economy, which is an economy over the past 8 years has produced 4 unicorns, which in the business world are private businesses that are not publicly traded yet and are worth over $1 billion. So it's a really important economy to study, and I'm particularly interested in shared lodging, aka Airbnb, vacation rental by owner, or home away. So this framework is, first of all, contextualized by urban growth and how shared lodging and sharing economy fits into that. And then a landscape approach to kind of broaden the horizon of research that's done on shared lodging, and then thinking about systems to prepare for the changes that are already happening and probably will continue to happen due to not just sharing economy, but innovations in urban landscapes. So 60% of our world's population is expected to live in urban areas by 2050. And John Wilmoth, he's the director of the UN's Population Division, said that urban growth is going to be one of the biggest challenges of the 21st century. We're going to have to find infrastructure, employment, and housing for folks. So in a way, shared lodging kind of represents one solution to these issues. You know, if you're an Airbnb host, you can supplement your income with tourist dollars and be able to afford the housing in expensive cities. You can also potentially, theoretically, save on infrastructure that needs to be built for accommodations that would traditionally be built for tourists. So there's definitely solutions that are offered. But unfortunately, sometimes innovations can also be the bane of their existence. So Nicholas Wise came out with an article last year that said that sustainable development isn't just about urban planners being savvy at reusing existing resources, buildings, or materials, but it's also about protecting historically and ecologically significant places. So in the case of Airbnb, what's been covered in popular press recently is its issues with gentrification happening in some cities. So, for instance, we'll take San Francisco. There was a community there in Chinatown that was comprised mainly of immigrants, and they depended upon this affordable housing, not only because San Francisco is expensive, but also to assimilate a little bit easier into the country, you know, with that cultural enclave. Well, the landlords found out about Airbnb and the economic potential from that, so those units got converted over to Airbnb rentals. And so tourists were coming expecting to have this authentic experience of Chinatown, and they were seeing posters pinned up on light posts that had CEOs of sharing economy companies impaled on spikes, including Brian Chesky, who is the CEO of Airbnb. So in that way, you know, Airbnb wants to use this authentic resource to market the community, but the gentrification might actually be hurting their potential growth. So the current research on shared lodging is pretty linear. You know, Zervasnal in 2014 came out with an article that's widely cited saying that, hey, in Houston, Texas, for every 1% increase in Airbnb, there's a 0.5% decrease in quarterly occupancy sales. Okay, wow, that sounds really terrible, but it's also pretty linear, and a lot of the research is the cause and effect. So there's not this comprehensive of, hey, what are some of these other factors going on in the urban landscapes in which shared lodging is occurring? So UNESCO, I really love this approach. It's a historic urban landscape approach. And basically they say, if you're studying an urban phenomenon, in this case it would be shared lodging, you should think about the natural and, well, ecological and the cultural factors that have been compounded over time in an urban landscape to really understand the context of the impacts that you're studying. And urban landscapes contain a genius loci, or kind of like the sense of place, and they give some natural and cultural features that could be simultaneously considered. They don't all have to be considered at the same time, but the approach is saying, hey, you know, if you want to tackle issues of affordable housing, you can't say that, for instance, Airbnb is just causing the loss of affordable housing. There's other, if you're thinking about San Francisco, they've faced an affordable housing crisis for the past 3 decades. So there's lots of other cultural and natural factors such as topography and geomorphology that would shape the spatial organization of cities that should also maybe be considered. But landscapes are dynamic and they're constantly changing. So we can actually think about the tourism landscape or the urban landscape as a whole as a dynamic system. It's constantly changing. So in tourism research, we call this the tourism area life cycle. And basically we can kind of predict what's going to happen in tourism destinations. And this can be interpreted in any time frame, a number of tourists. But basically you're heading towards a climax, and then you have a decision where you can either just decline and start at the beginning, or you can find some sort of innovation to keep you moving forward. The only thing about this model is that it's pretty linear and it doesn't account for innovations such as the sharing economy that would pop up in these systems. So in ecological systems, we know that there's a potential for disturbances. You're heading towards that climax, just like I showed you here, but there is a potential for a disturbance. And in this case, I'm saying that this could be the sharing economy or shared lodging, if you're talking about tourism landscapes particularly. So if you were to take the idea of disturbances and kind of superimpose that onto this idea of how a destination develops, this is where shared lodging can potentially interrupt this development. But there's one other thing about this that I also really think that we could improve in sharing economy research, is that all of these arrows are pointed down. Disturbances typically send you back, back to a previous step in the system. I think these arrows could actually be turned up. And so changing that discourse and rhetoric around the sharing economy from one that produces reactive regulatory landscapes that are kind of fearful of change, there's actually a potential for innovation. So Costanza, in his article about ecosystem health, actually talks about disturbances in a system. They don't have to be treated as diseases. They can actually be taken a hold of and used as innovations in order to take a step forward. So, in summary, what did I just talk to you about? Well, first of all, the sharing economy, is it a glance towards future production and consumption in urban landscapes? I'd say absolutely. I think it's just an example of one type of innovation that's kind of going against the grain of this neoliberal, production and consumption based on extraction of virgin resources that are unlimited. I think that people are seeing that, hey, we're getting really crowded and there's a need for us to kind of change the way in which we consume and produce things. And also expanding the horizons in which we study these innovations. So it's not just this cause and effect relationship. There's also other impacts from other factors in the landscapes in which these phenomena are happening. And just also kind of shifting that rhetoric to expand towards not just disruption, but also innovation. Thank you.
So what do you think it would take to make the shared economy coming into a city be a step forward instead of a step back? Is it something within the community, people-wise, environment-wise? What do you think? Yeah,
so a lot of the rhetoric around sharing economy that I'm kind of alluding to is more of a negative tone is coming from that top-down approach. So, I mean, it is the regulatory authorities that are kind of making the reactive solutions, and those are the opinions that are being solicited by popular press. One of the goals of my actual dissertation methods is to solicit the perspectives of hosts and residents themselves, because that's yet to be done, although they are the voting and tax-paying body of urban landscapes. So I think kind of getting those perceptions would create a more holistic conversation, especially getting the perception of the participants of these type of innovations themselves. They're kind of left out of the conversation a lot of the times, and they're just kind of talked about. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
I know I've talked to you a little bit about your methods, but what are you doing to actually, study this? I know you talked about.
Yeah. So I have a couple of ideas, definitely from the social impacts perspective, I plan on interviewing residents, also people in regulatory authority, business owners, that kind of thing, the decision makers of the community, and then hosts themselves. I'll be surveying residents, interviewing hosts, and then I have some ideas on looking at, from that historical perspective, like how has land use changed over time in Savannah, because that's where I'm hoping to do data collection, and also thinking about what is the tradition of tourism development, accommodations, like has there always been the building of brand new hotels, or have people always rented out their homes? What has this tradition been like in terms of resource consumption in that tourism industry?
Have you ever thought about considering like couch surfing or kind of these aspects of the sharing economy that aren't necessarily where there's not the monetary exchange?
Right. Like considered in what way?
Just like as another part of the sharing economy, or if a place has already engaged in couch surfing, they're more likely to switch to something like Airbnb.
Yeah, so I plan on asking people about past usage of things in the sharing economy, and technically actually couch surfing doesn't count as a shared or collaborative activity. I study Airbnb particularly because it's really interesting that there is a monetary exchange, but there's also this expected cultural exchange as well, and it kind of creates this interesting tension between the user, the host, and also the neighboring residents nearby. So,
Go ahead.
Yes.
So you said you were working in Savannah. I was thinking about kind of the differences in these dynamics between urban and rural spaces, because I'd imagine, I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about that, if you're staying at a small little place out in the middle of Vermont versus downtown New York City, how that kind of changes those dynamics.
Which dynamics do you mean? Like your experience, or do you mean like the host's perceptions of?
Or just this idea of, you were talking about ecosystem dynamics. And disruption and aggression.
I'm not sure that you can really superimpose this model onto like a rural landscape, just because the reason why that the sharing economy is so explosive on the scene in the past 8 years is because we know that in urban areas, that more increased density you have, disruptive innovation occurs. So it's a little bit harder for these ideas to really catch on and grow in rural landscapes. So as far as the amount of disruption that it would cause, like having an Airbnb on a rural property versus an urban property, there's not as many tensions because you don't have as many neighbors to deal with. You don't have as many zoning ordinances. You also, if you want to get down to resource consumption, that's a totally different question, I think. But I don't know if that answered you at all. But we can talk later. Yeah. Yes.
I think you said at the beginning, is here like a home department, the forestry department?
Yes.
What is the connection between the sharing economy and your forestry background?
Right, so in the forestry school, we have a recreation and tourism and natural resources department. And my advisor's sitting right in the back of the room, Dr. Bynum Bully. But yeah, we have a really unique position in that department. We study tourism and recreation and also basically human dimensions of natural resource management. So, all right, I think that's all the time. Yeah, thank you.